welcome to our presentation. Today, the presentation on practical alternatives to traditional school discipline for girls of color. We're here with Stephanie Patton from the Columbus City Preparatory School for girls in Columbus, Ohio. I'm Becca Shapiro, Director of Administration for the Georgetown Law Center on Poverty and Inequality. And I'm here to run over some housekeeping and also to introduce you to the leaders of today's webinar. First, that we ask that you mute your lines and disable your cameras. I'm going to pause for a second to allow you to do that now. So even though you'll be muted, we encourage you to actively listen by using our chat box where you can type questions and we'll circle back to them during our discussion after the presentation. After the formal presentation, we'll open up the webinar to office hours in which we encourage a dynamic discussion with our speaker, leaders of the Learning Network, and our youth advisors and each other. And you could do that by inviting yourself to join us on the screen or by using your chat box to make questions or comments. And now I'll introduce you to some of the leaders of our Learning Network team. We have Rebecca Epstein, who is the Executive Director of Georgetown Law Center on Poverty and Inequality. We have Dr. Cindy McKinney, Executive Director of the National Black Women's Justice Institute, and Johanna Thompson, who is the Senior Public Health and Community Outreach Specialist for MBWJI. We also have the pleasure of having Jade Thompson with us today, who is a youth advisor to our Learning Network. And now I'm going to pass it off to Rebecca Epstein. Rebecca, you're muted. 1 second. There you go.
Now?
Yes.
Okay. As Becca mentioned, I'm Rebecca Epstein. I'm the Executive Director of the Georgetown Law Center on Poverty and Inequality. And on behalf of the Learning Network, welcome to everyone and thank you so much for joining us. We're really honored to have Principal Patton as our guest speaker and expert today to hold office hours. To introduce her, this is Principal Patton's 6th year as the principal of the Columbus City Preparatory School for Girls in Columbus, Ohio, where she oversees 350 girls, 6th through 8th grades. And she's worked in the field of education for over 25 years. She's licensed as a superintendent and she's worked for the Ohio Department of Education. And her approach to education is to reshape how Black girls learn, lead, and leverage their voices. Her leadership has been transformative, and it's recently been featured in the film Push Out, the Criminalization of Black Girls in Schools, which was produced, of course, by Monique W. Morris and based on her book. And Dr. Morris is a co-leader of our Learning Network. I highly recommend the film to everyone attending this webinar, and hopefully you've had the chance to look at the video clips of Principal Patton that we recently circulated to all webinar attendees. Did my video and audio just go out or was I audible? I hope so.
You were audible.
Okay, my computer gave me the message that it froze. At any rate, thanks again so much for attending and I'll turn things over to Principal Patton.
Hi, I want to thank you for inviting me for this opportunity. And I wanted to be able to start with just some background and go into hopefully topics of your interest, and would love to answer questions when we're complete with the presentation. And so I'll start with what I call the iron butterfly effect. And I discovered this theory basically working at a single gender school. And it really just aligns with the Black girl. And so when I say the iron butterfly, I talk about a hard exterior, which is the iron. It's a steely frame, which represents strength, toughness, resiliency, and courage. And then we look at the interior, which is a lot more fragile, as the butterfly, and we say that it represents vulnerability, hurt, sadness, fear, hopelessness, and insecurity. And so sometimes we as adults don't see that fragile inside of the young Black girl, and we tend not to treat them accordingly because we're only dealing with the hard exterior. And so we really have to take that time, and that's my focus, to get to that fragile interior to help those girls blossom. And so the effect of the iron butterfly is adultification, where we're less empathetic. And so, for example, we have students laughing in the classroom at a time where the teacher may not warrant laughter, and it's seen as a sign of disrespect or not taking things seriously, or being off task, instead of looking at it as simple, they're enjoying your class, or they're happy to be in school, or they're happy to be around their friends. And so again, I think it all goes to what your lens looks like and how you interpret different behaviors. And so that's one effect of the iron butterfly. The second one that I'll talk about a little bit, which is popular in middle and high school, is the cell phone. And so I don't know any teenager that willingly likes to give up their cell phone if it's confiscated or they're using it during school when they're not supposed to. But my question is, does that warrant being slammed to the ground by an adult or an SRO officer? And I think that in the trailer for Push Out, one of the things that you've seen was the young lady being slammed. And on one of those occasions, it was due to the simple fact of a student inappropriately using her cell phone, whether she was texting and then refusing to give the cell phone up and then refusing to leave the classroom. So again, does the response meet the infraction? And I think that's really what we have to focus on when we're dealing with young Black girls and things that we encounter on a daily basis or in the school setting. So that'll be kind of my focus in terms of talking about the iron butterfly effect and just young Black girls and how we can respond to the things that we see. So the next thing I'll talk about, I'm sorry, Beck, I'm having trouble with the movement of the PowerPoint to the next screen. Okay, thank you. I want to introduce you to Latrice, and Latrice is my middle name, and it's kind of the inspiration of being a young Black girl. This was taken in 7th grade, and you'll look and you'll see a smiling young lady who was happy, school pictures, living experience of a middle school life. But what I will say is that don't let Latrice fool you because Latrice could also be disruptive. She could be insubordinate. She could question authority. And she had an anger that was unchanneled and really unrecognized as to where the anger was coming from. So she was angry, but not necessarily knew why she was angry. And so I say, as a young Black girl, and what I tell my young Black girls is that you don't understand that the world sees you different until you don't, and so, until you do. And so understanding that and learning that as an adult of how those behaviors or expressions were categorized, it was a hard lesson to learn as an adult. So then that ties into my mission as I'm working with young Black girls, is really to learn how to regulate those emotions and communicate through empowerment, whether it's written or whether it's verbal. And so nobody taught me the soft skills that I needed to survive in the adult world. And so I had to learn those as I went along. And so, for example, communication. I had to learn that it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And so a lot of our young girls want to be heard and they want to express themselves, but we have to teach them how to express themselves in a manner where people are more receptive to it. And so another soft skill would be teamwork. And teamwork is to show students that we're all working towards a common goal. So anytime I'm having a conversation with one of my students, we have to go back to whether we agree to disagree or not, we still have to meet that common goal, and that's for them to be successful. And so when they recognize that you're partnering for their growth and their success, you get more cooperation and you get more of the soft skills that present themselves. Another soft skill is the problem solving. And so the ability to accurately assess a situation and arrive at a positive solution. And so if you go into every conflict with them and explain that the goal is to have a positive solution, then their mindset shifts. And so a lot of people ask me, how do you deal with drama in middle school or drama between girls or conflict? That's how we started. So that every time we come in, the goal is to find a positive solution to move forward. And just that everybody's on the same page. Doesn't have to be an agreement. We don't have to leave as best friends, but we have to leave with an agreement on the table. So that drastically reduces some of what people would consider drama in middle school amongst girls. And so it can be any adult that can do this for children. It could be an organization, it could be teachers, it could be administration. For me, when I was in high school, I was removed from my Algebra 2 class and just being disruptive and probably, you know, talking when I'm not supposed to. And so the assistant principal had a group he called Kometz Angels. His last name was Kometz, Dr. Kometz. And he came to me and said, well, I want you to be a Kometz Angel. I want you to work in the office. And he really worked and mentored me. Now, I didn't realize that this group was for maybe what they deem as at-risk children. But he took me under my wing. I saw it as a positive. I saw it as being responsible. And it really changed how I was in high school. And then as a principal, I always made sure to reach out to those students who were facing the most challenges and to channel and utilize their leadership skills, their responsibility skills, and sow that into them so that they too can see that they're not being isolated for behavior. So I think that was a great start. And again, it could be anyone. You know, Dr. Kometz was a middle-aged white male. So again, when you're invested in children, children are going to be receptive no matter who you are or what your gender or race or ethnicity is. They will be open to that. So, you know, that goes along with my story of Latrice. She comes out every now and then, but really trying to channel that and make sure that we are teaching our young ladies to manage their emotions. Can we do the slide, please? Okay. So again, I would think that this was an isolated feeling that I had as a young Black girl to a young Black woman. But recently in the news, they talk about Gabrielle Union gets fired from America's Got Talent. And through her statement that she explained that ever since she was a little girl, she has wrestled the challenges that come along with speaking up, even when you know you're speaking up for what's right. And so I hear this a lot from my students, because if they feel that they are right, they want to continue to get their point across. And so if Gabrielle Union is struggling with this as an adult, you can imagine how hard it is to struggle with that as a young girl. And so again, providing the support and the opportunity and giving them the encouragement to be an advocate for themselves is something that is very beneficial, because again, when you're dealing with this as an adult, it's hard. So we really want to protect our young girls when they're dealing with this when they're young. And if they're shut down every time they offer an opinion or every time they want to have a conversation with a teacher or an adult, then it's going to be a residual effect when they get older, and they're going to struggle of when to speak up and when not to speak up. So one of our missions at our school is you could be the only woman in the boardroom, but you have the confidence and the skill set to be able to speak up and advocate for what your goals are at the table. And so, you know, we want to encourage that as well. So the next thing that I'm going to talk about is the belief gap in education. And so the belief gap is the difference between what our children are actually capable of achieving and what people believe they are capable of achieving. And so this is driven by race or socioeconomic status, but it really puts children into categories based on who they are, not how they perform. And so I believe that you have to confront in your organization or in your school, what is your belief gap? And so for us, that was the first question that we asked as a staff. What do you believe about Black girls? What do you believe about Black girls academically? What do you believe about them socially? And what do you believe about them with their behavior? And we had to have open and honest conversations. We had to provide a safe space for people to be able to talk about, their perceptions. And so the effect of living in a belief gap, or an organization that has a belief gap, is that there are lower numbers identified and gifted and talented. There are implicit biases, which could lead to recommendations for high school or post-secondary career choices based on where you feel, that child is allotted in life. And so we really had to challenge some of these things and look at our overall program to see if we were a part of the negative effects of girls and their trajectory. And so one thing that we did was we changed the narrative. We offer a humanities course, which is high school level, and it focuses on social justice through English language arts and social studies. And we offer to our 8th graders who perform consistently at a proficient rate or higher. And so what this did was this instilled an honor in our young ladies, and it instilled a privilege. And so then we had a lot of students trying to meet that criteria so that they too can get this experience. And it was very successful and very popular among our students and our parents. So we've now opened it up for 7th grade and 6th grade. As they go along, they're being trained for this higher level of learning, and hopefully that will transfer into high school, and they'll start to take your AP courses or early college credit. So some of the feedback that I get from high school principals is that my students are the most prepared when they get to high school because they're familiar with the curriculum already, and they already have the high expectation. And so again, it's really about changing the narrative through high standards, high expectations, and you have to communicate this every day to every student. So whether you have the lowest scores in the building or the highest scores in the building, my message is the same. That you're an honor student, that you're striving to take higher level courses, or that you're being the best student that you can be, that's preparing you to do whatever you choose to do in life. And so I think that's very important that we don't differentiate the message. So everybody in my school understands what my expectations are, and we set goals for every student, and we set stretch goals for every student. And so when we're looking at curriculum and we're looking at standards, whether a student is in 7th grade on a 7th grade level or a 3rd grade level, it is my expectation for the teacher to start at that 7th grade and scaffold down, or they help that student from that 2nd grade level to reach that 7th grade level. But we don't teach down. So we build them up to meet the minimum standard, and then we enrich them once they've met that standard. So again, our goal is to make sure that all of our students are on grade level, and then we encourage them to push beyond grade level. And so there's no stigma because everybody's working hard to reach their own personal goal and then their stretch goal. And they know that, and we do incentives and we reward accordingly. So again, my high expectations are for every student, regardless to what background you fit into. So after we raised our awareness, we have a slide, we started to talk about culture and climate and what that meant for our school. And what we started with was the book Push Out by Dr. Morris. And this book was an amazing eye-opener for our staff. And it wasn't things that we didn't already know, but it was things that showed us a different perspective on how we were viewing things. And so after you establish your awareness with that belief gap, you have to shift your mind in your practices. And so, there's a saying that if you know better, do better. So if you know better, then you have to do better. And so the great thing about the awareness of the movie and the book is that, you know, there is a whole population now that understands and knows better. And so that we can only start to do better as a whole, and that more girls are impacted on a larger scale. And it's not just independent based on one school, one principal, or one staff. And so we started with the school-wide book study, and any community partner, anybody who had active interactions with my school had to read the book and participate in the reading. And so this way, all your stakeholders are on the same page, and everybody has the same goal, the same mission, and again, the same expectation from the leader of the building to say that we are all in this together. And so one of the examples that I'll use of bias that we discovered was we had a student who was of non-color. We had a white student who scored the highest in the building. Her scores on the standardized test were very high. On any of our district testing was very high, but she did no work in the classroom. And so her grades were F's across the board with an occasional D. And so at the end of the year, we do sit and we look at all the data and we decide, you know, what students are going to be retained and what students are going to be promoted to the next grade level. And we had very similar students, one black and one white. And at first, it was almost instantaneously that we were going to pass the young lady because we were very, we were sure that she was retaining the knowledge. She just wasn't doing the work. But then we had some students of non-color that we were discussing, and terms like insubordination, refusal to do work, and other terms like that were used to describe. And so we had to pull back and say, are we being equitable in our decisions, or are we viewing two students with the same narrative differently based on our confirmation bias or our implicit bias? And so that really made us go back and look at how we were doing things with students to make sure that we were equitable in our decisions and that our responses were the same, which I think the book Push Out gets to, is how we respond to girls of color as opposed to girls of non-color. So that's how we started with Push Out. And from that, we had a tiered discipline system that we created. So we'll talk a little bit about the level discipline. Tier 1 requires a teacher response, replacement behaviors established, students redirected, and parent contact. So these are your minor offenses. So let's say, for example, if a student responds in a manner which the teacher feels is disrespectful, my expectation and the expectation of the staff is that you just gently redirect. So for example, if a student comes into the office and they start asking for what they need, I'll often pause and I'll say, good morning. And then that connects with them, and then they'll say, good morning, Ms. Patton, and then they'll ask their questions. So again, when you give students replacement behaviors, a lot of those things that typically teachers will write students up for is taken away. So if they ask a question that you feel is inappropriate or disrespectful, you can model back to them in the manner that you want to be addressed. And a lot of times they will correct themselves and you move forward. Tier 2 is also a teacher response, and you give an alternative to behavior. So that might be, do you need to take a break, which we call TAB? And they could take a break by going to see their support person, which we'll talk about a little bit later. They can come to the office for a break. We have a student center there with computers and a quiet space for them to continue their work. So there's no instruction missed. So these are alternatives to being sent out of the classroom or being written up on a referral. And a lot of times those students will then start to ask, can I take a break? Or can I step outside in the hallway? Can I call my mom to calm down? So those are some of the things that we do for the level 2s that might be a little bit more disruptive than just a redirection, because they can't de-escalate at this time. The third tier, which is typically like a level 3, it might be verbal altercation or physical altercation. That's when you call for an administrator, and the administrator will come to the room and we redirect. I don't send safety and security to rooms. I, as an administrator, build a relationship where I let the students know that it's a safe space and we need to talk. And even if it results in discipline, you know, what I'm going to ask is that you remove yourself from the room. You have to escape the situation. And all my parents know that escape is the first option. So whether that's a student feels like they're getting ready to have a verbal altercation, if anxiety is taken over, they can remove themselves from that situation. They can come to the office or go see their support person. But if I have to be called to the room, then I'm just going to simply ask them to come with me, and they understand that we're not going to get into a confrontation as administrator and student, that that's not the place to handle the conflict. So that's my level 3. And then we also do a parent contact on that one as well. And then teachers also don't send the kids out of the classroom, because you never want to send a student or a young lady who is distraught out by herself, unmonitored, without any intervention. So the 3 tiers that we started have reduced our discipline. So the years 2017 to 2019, insubordination decreased 78%. Out of school suspensions, 100%. And so if everybody is on board with your level discipline system, your parents are aware, your students are aware, it really does cut down on the actual discipline portion, and they become teachable moments. And so most of our time is taken up with teachable moments, as opposed to doing hearing letters and parent meetings and then ultimately suspension. So I attribute the level discipline to the decreasing of insubordination and other infractions in that area. The next thing that we do is restorative practice. And restorative practice is sort of the common trend right now, but we use it not as a program, but as a practice. So I would say it has to be infused into your culture. So you can't just take certain aspects of restorative practice and then it doesn't fit with your beliefs and your values and your communication to your community. So for example, for our restorative practices, our #1 goal when we have conflict is to repair harm. And so every student knows coming in, if we're going to resolve the issue, we have to repair the harm. And so some of the ways that we do that is through peace circles. And a peace circle can be, Ms. Patton, I'm having an issue with a student. Can you call her down so we could talk about it? We go into a conference room. We have a special pink flower that we use. Each person holds the flower. They say their side of the story. And again, we look for that positive solution when we walk away. And what I say to students is, if we all walk away with an agreement, if it comes back to the table, we're going to look at the broken agreement, not the infraction of conflict, but the broken agreement, because this is what you've said to me that you can do as your part. It's in your skill set to be able to do this as we walk away. And so this has to be infused with students, with teachers, with parents, and with administrators. So I've had students come to me who have a conflict with a teacher. They feel they've been treated unfairly, or they feel that the teacher said something to them and could have pulled them to the side. And so on that teacher's planning period, we will set up a peace circle, and the teacher and the student work out the conflict, and then they're fine. And then we go back to business as usual. And so then you don't have lingering problems that just persist daily because teachers holding grudges or students are holding grudges. with administrators. Sometimes, you know, the students feel I may be too stern, and they'll come and they'll say, well, we're all being punished for a few. And so then we have to talk about how to repair the harm for the students that are affected. If, for example, if I say, well, we're not going to have a dress down day on Friday because too many students are out of location or something minor like that. So everybody has to take a part in the practice, and everybody has to have that vulnerability to say, I understand that I harmed you, so let's work on our relationship and repair it to move forward. And so again, I'll reiterate that the culture has to be ready for the practice because it is the foundation. And the last thing we do is if a student is out of school suspension, we do a reentry meeting where the students know when they come back that we are on their side, we are reaching for their success, and is there anything they need from us to move forward? So again, repairing the harm of them being out of school and letting them know that we're here to help them. So the next thing that we concentrated on, and by survey, this by far is the most important to students. So when I talk to my young girls, this is what we talk about, the relationship building. And so at my school, we have an advisory program where students meet every day for 25 minutes for social emotional curriculum. So that could be, we use the 7 mindsets, and it's a program that focuses on characteristics. So if we're talking about kindness, or if we're talking about giving, if we're talking about anxiety. And so they have different activities that our students use during this time. They do sister circles, and a sister circle is where they all sit in a circle and they pick a common topic that they can bond over, and they support each other in that topic. And it also shows we have more things in common than we have apart. And so every 5 weeks, we do a week where a teacher sponsors clubs the last period of the day, and the student can sign up based on interest, and it's multi-grade level. So what this does is it establishes relationships with teachers and students who they may not have. And so it gives you a connection that's not academic or not threatening, but it's just us having a good time connecting. And so you don't get the insubordination or the, you're not my teacher. So again, tailoring programs to meet the needs of what you see in your building. The next thing that we do, and this was very telling for us, is we do an index card activity with staff. So we put on one index card, we put a student's name. So we put all the students' names in the building on an index card. And we, as a staff, go through, and if we can identify something personal about that student, we remove their card off the wall. So it has to be something that maybe somebody has interacted with that student and had a personal conversation with. And so what we discovered was we had quite a few students that no staff member knew anything personal about. And that was kind of sad. And that was eye-opening, that there are children that walk through our building every day and we couldn't tell you anything personal about them. And so what we did was we developed what we call 2x10 meetings. And so our advisory teachers have to meet with 2 students every week for 10 minutes and just talk. Not about school, not about academics, and not just the student sharing, but the teacher sharing. And so by the end of the year, it is our goal that every student will have had a personal connection with an adult in the building. And so again, connections and relationships was identified by our students as the most important motivation for them as young Black girls. They want to connect so that they can be heard and they can reach out and talk. And that builds, again, relationships. So you're able to repair harm with someone who you have at least some connection to, or know that they care about your well-being. We also do out-of-the-box thinking. So you have to take risk. You have to be creative in how you're addressing your young ladies and your student body. And so some of the out-of-the-box thinking that we do something called minute meetings. And I'll talk about minute meetings in a minute. And we also have community day, which I'll explain. And then we have town hall meetings and morning salute. So first I'll talk a little bit about town hall meeting. So with town hall meeting, we do once a month, and it's basically like an assembly on different topics. So the first one is girl empowerment, and our students can perform in any way to express that they are empowered with being a young lady, empowered of being a young lady of color. They're celebrating who they are, and they're encouraging others to celebrate who they are. And so our one in October is girl empowerment. We also have speakers from different careers that our students, express interest in. We do Women History Month. We do Black History Month. We do just a lot of different topics that affect our young ladies. And then we have morning salute, which is every morning. For 10 minutes, I open up the school day with a quote of the week and then a focus. And so we've done everything from "You are a queen," fix another queen's crown. We've done things like "I love myself." We've done things like, famous people in history. We've done Black sororities. We've done HBCUs. So we just infuse that culture and those positive images into our young ladies every single day. And how you know that it's working and how you know it's effective is that you will start to then hear the students reiterate the same things. And even when there's conflict and their parents are there, they'll say, well, Miss Patton said that, we're not to focus on, social media, and that we have things that we need to build upon and do at school. And so you get that sense of that they get it. They may not be able to execute it all the time, but they understand it, and they'll be able to apply those skills as they mature. So that's very important as well. So now I'll show you the template for minute meetings. So next slide. Okay. So there are 4 questions that I ask every student. I set a desk out in the hallway and the students come out. So my first question is, how are you doing today? What challenges are you facing at school? If you had to choose an adult, who could you go to if you needed support? And can you share a story of success that you had at school recently? And then I create a spreadsheet so that every person knows who their student is identified. So it could be the cafeteria worker, it could be the instructional assistant, it could be the secretary, it could be a teacher, it could be a nurse, any adult in the building. And so what happens is sometimes when that student gets escalated, the first question I ask is, do you need to see your support person? And a lot of people might say, is that disruptive? Wonder if their support person is teaching at the time. Sometimes they just go to a calm space in that classroom and they feel better. And then they talk to their support person when there's a moment for them to speak, whether it's if the teacher's doing stations or the kids are doing independent work, or they just set up an appointment to come back to see the teacher during lunch. It causes no disruption. And then the student will say, I'm ready to go back to class. And they go back with some advice on how to solve the issues that were in the previous classroom. So the minute meetings and support person have been a big success for us. And it just identifies, a person that you can go to so that you're never alone. And I think that's very important at this stage. The next is community day, which is out of the box thinking. And our community days, we have 90-minute early release days once a month. And so on these days, we take an hour and a half left of the school day after lunch, and we do grade level activities based on team values and goals. So it might be on respect, it might be on relationships. And we just talk as a community and we build our community. Again, because it's all about the messaging and what you're sowing into these girls every day. And so we talk about respect, we talk about relationships, and this builds also that community with teachers. And so this is something that we just thought of this year, and I decided to implement it, and now it's really caught on. And the girls love Community Day because they actually love being a part of a community. So when you're having some of those problems with girls who feel isolated, that's when you get the behaviors, because they feel like even demonstrated in the movie Push Out, that school's not for everyone, and that, you know, they don't feel a part of the system. So it's very important that you have those girls feel a part of the system. And so I came across the poem that just is some of the things that girls express to me. They say that they're angry when they have to justify their anger. Why do you have a frown on your face? Why are you looking like that? Smile. You know, sometimes they just want to be themselves, and we have to honor that and not apply that to a characteristic of them being angry or being a certain way because they're not, you know, appearing the way that we want them to appear. And so you have to find out the reasons why, because that matters to girls. And then you have to accept them for who they are. And so I'll talk a little bit about experience versus consequence. Again, focusing on the reason behind the behavior as opposed to the behavior. And the questions that you can ask yourself is, what systematic supports do you have to address the behaviors? What infractions result in your suspensions? How will your students re-enter from suspension? And do you offer replacement behaviors? And how do you model the behaviors you want to see in your students? So again, if you do this phase before you get to the consequence phase, I do think that you will reduce the number of suspensions and infractions that you have. One of the violations that we see currently, if we can go back one, that we see in the news is about hairstyles. So I know a lot of places will address hairstyles or say that it's unprofessional, but I will say that there are career centers and performing arts schools where kids wear colors in their hair and they're artistic in the way that they express themselves by dress, and it's considered artistic. But then in some of the inner city schools, we may say that it's ghetto or it's unacceptable in the workplace. So one of the things that we do to counter that is we have a natural hair day where everyone can wear their hair in the manner that they feel good in, because that's what it's about, feeling good. And then your professionalism comes out because you want to do your best work when you're feeling your best. And so we talk about attitude versus personality. What's the difference? Is it an attitude or is it the personality? And so I have a teacher whose daughter goes to our school, and we talk a lot about that. And her daughter's a non-color. And we have children that are sent down to the office or want to discuss, you know, that they're rude, they don't speak or they don't answer, you know, when they're spoken to. And her daughter is very shy, and oftentimes she'll stand and she won't speak. And so we had to have the conversation of, if this was a girl of color, we wouldn't accept her not speaking or being in a room with adults and not speaking. And so she really had to come back and say, you know what, I have to check my privilege, because you're absolutely right. You know, my daughter needs to speak, because at first she would just say, oh, that's just her. That's just how she is. And that is the absolute truth. But what I said is that we either have to treat all young ladies like that, or we have to have the same expectation that they speak when they're in a room. And so again, checking our own biases, but then making sure that we're not applying those to children based on color. So I always say that attitude versus personality is a big one, because sometimes we ascribe it as a personality, but oftentimes we say it's an attitude, and then we want to apply the discipline as a result of that. So just some to-dos, have some bonding activities, create a venue to express opinions, offer them a place to write or a chance to write to release their expression, listen first and then try to understand. Things not to do: do not match their emotions. So if they're escalated, please don't be escalated with them. Do not tag team. So if you see one person talking to them, don't have another adult come over and say, yes, because yesterday when I talked to you, you did X, Y, and Z. You know, really let one person speak to that student about the current behavior that is personalized with them. Do not use the principal as intimidation. So instead of saying, you can go see Ms. Patton, if you don't want to follow rules, you can say, hey, would you like to speak to Principal Patton? And maybe she can help with, you know, some of the things you're struggling with. So use the principal as a resource, not as an intimidation When you're asking questions to the student and their well-being, don't use sarcasm. And certainly do not talk about students to other teachers where that teacher may go back and repeat. Like, I know you were having trouble in English because Miss So-and-so told me, because then the student feels like you're violating trust. If you're an organization and not a school, some of the things that you can do is make sure you're committed for the long haul. Just don't go in 1 year and then move on to the next. Be committed for the long haul. Make sure you have an understanding of Black girls, have a targeted focus, and be open if it doesn't fit your narrative. Because sometimes when you're writing grants and you're doing things, you have a certain parameter, but if it doesn't fit the culture of the building and how the school is trying to address the needs of Black girls, then you really need to assess if it's a right fit for you. And then certainly build relationships with staff, students, and be a part of the community. I would say be proactive. Girls want to be heard. So we have a bullying harassment form that we use that's a non-negotiable. So again, if you feel that there is drama brewing, or you you're being bullied or harassed, you come fill the form out. We put it on bright pink paper. I know to grab that immediately. And then we do our conflict resolution. And so the first thing a parent will ask is, did you fill out a bullying form? Did you let the teacher know? If they didn't, then we talk about a consequence for not using the tools that you have, versus it escalated all the way to a fight. So 99% of our verbal altercations are stopped because the student expresses their concern about being harassed or bullying, and we get to it immediately. So that's being proactive. And as a result of that, our fighting violations decreased 84%, and our out of school suspensions decreased 83%. From 2016 to 2019 of May, we had 0 fights in 2 years. And so I attribute a lot of that is to putting a system in place where girls can express themselves. And so then they don't have to go to what we do when we don't have communication, and that might be getting physical. Just to touch really quick on trauma based, because I know that also is something that people are looking into. Historical trauma for Black women include childhood abuse, neglect, feelings of rejection and abandonment. What I say with trauma based is that you don't have to understand the trauma, but just understand the effects of trauma, so that it can lead to aggressive behavior, depression, impulsivity. And so then you deal with those things. You deal with depression in your young Black girls. You deal with the aggressive behavior in young Black girls, and understand that it's coming from a place of trauma. And so you can create plans of success for these students and put in mental health supports. We partner with Children's Hospital. We have a behavior specialist on site to see students in real time when that trauma is triggered. So again, address the trauma. It's not just about knowing the trauma or understanding the trauma, but understand the signs of what can happen when a student has been involved in trauma or is triggered by a trauma. So I would say treat the behaviors, and that comes from being trauma informed, and just counter the effects of trauma. So start the healing process. How you can counter it is provide a nurturing environment. Let students know that you are there to support them. Build the girls up with their self-esteem and self-worth. Address the mental issues. Begin the healing process. Provide counseling, not detention. And be familiar with the effects, even if you don't understand the drama. I think that's very important, especially the counseling piece. We have to remove that stigma in the African American community that counseling is not for us. And so once you make counseling cool, then students want to talk and they want to reach out, and then they're not harboring that trauma inside. So I'll leave you with a couple of takeaways. One, be intentional in everything that you do. Don't be reactionary. So if you know these problems are going on, take a proactive measure and put it into your systematic approach into your organization. Be proactive with students through data digs. What is your data saying about Black girls academically and behaviorally? State your expectations every day, every staff member, every community member, and take risk. The students will appreciate the effort more than the lack of effort. So if those, if I were to offer any takeaways, that's what I would offer. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Principal Patton. We're going to open up our presentation, the office hours portion. So Johanna, I'm going to invite you to the screen, and then we can start our discussion.
Okay.
There you are.
Well, that was extremely resourceful. I was in the chat box, Principal Patton, highlighting some of the things that you were saying, and then having really a mostly robust conversation with Stephanie out there in our online universe. And so at this moment, what we are able to do, and Becca, I don't mind being the only person on the screen, but I feel like it would be fantastic to just make everybody available on the screen so I can see if there are people that are look like they have a question or something like that. That would be helpful to me. And so the way that we like to do our office hours is that folks are welcome to put a question in the chat box, a comment or a statement, and then ask where we're addressing it. And if Principal Patton would be available then to respond to any of those questions. So I am going to click into the chat box now and look and see whether or not there are any questions that have come up.
And everyone is now able to unmute themselves and enable your camera, so you can feel free to join Johanna on the screen.
So, okay, let's see. I think I might be getting one. Hello. Okay. I'm seeing one of my high school friends is on the line. Yeah. Let's see. I'm not seeing that any questions are coming in. Are there any questions? Okay, here we go. Here we go with our questions. You mentioned the 7 mindsets as a curriculum for social emotional teachings. Do you recommend others that could be used?
I have also been in touch with the developer of, it's called Lovescaping, and she is just starting the social emotional learning curriculum. I did a workshop, I attended a workshop where she did some activities, and it was outstanding. So I'm going to be working with her in the future. She does have a book on Amazon, but she is very attuned to addressing that trauma and reaching that place of love. So I would recommend her as well. We just started with the 7 mindsets because when you do a lot of research through Castle and other, that was one of the organizations that had a ready curriculum. So that's why we went with 7 mindsets. But certainly any that address those common pillars would work and be successful.
Great, thank you for that. How do we ensure our school culture is in place where we can start leading restorative practices?
I think you first start with surveys that ask the hard questions. So for us, we ask students, for example, describe your teacher's tone, and I might put the choices as welcoming, non-responsive, different things like that. And then we sat down as a staff and we determined based off of the responses, do you feel heard? Do you feel respected? Do you know how to repair harm? So once you get an idea of where your community is on those issues, then you'll know how your foundation is set to begin. And if you're not there yet, which is totally fine, then I would do a map, an outline of the progression to get there and then to get started. So you can start very small and then build your way up.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And then just going back, the resource for social emotional learning that Stephanie also was giving me the actual spelling of is CASEL, so the CASEL website that Principal Patton just referred to. And then Principal Patton, for Lovescaping, what was the resource? Who was the person?
Her name is Irene, but it is Lovescaping, one word. So I believe if you type Lovescaping, you'll see it.
Okay, and I'm spelling SACPING, scaping,
Yeah.
right? One word.
Yep.
Okay. All right, excellent. So those resources are just being put into the chat box also for everyone.
She's very receptive, and she'll respond to any questions that you have as well.
Excellent. Let's see, another one has just come in. I love these ideas and want to implement all of them. However, we are in an extremely under-resourced middle school, one counselor, one principal, no assistant principals, and class sizes of 25 plus. What suggestions do you have for implementing some of these ideas, minutes, meetings, sister circles, etc., with the resources that we have? Where would be the best place to start?
Oh, you're going to love this because I have no AP. My counselor is there 2 days a week. My social worker is there 1 day a week. So we are on the same page. I think it's about where you want to divert your resources to. So you're really just changing what you do for the positive instead of focusing on some of the areas that are the challenges. So for me, I do the minute meetings and my counselor does them. And so I might take 30 minutes and knock out 30 kids, and it might take me a week. It might take 2. And sometimes the teachers will ask the student in advance. So it's really just how I choose to spend my time with my resources. And then if you have any title money, for funding, I pay my teachers extended time. I give them like 20 hours extended time to work on all of the forms and the calculating of the data. And then I include in the schedule the advisory program. So I'm sure I could offer you more, but you can do it with a small staff because that's what I have. It's just about how you allocate your time in what you're doing. So I'll do a Survey Monkey with 5 questions for a grade level. The teachers will execute it and then I get the results. So a lot of that, I spend most of my day doing those type of things in counseling and talking to children instead of putting out fires. So it's just about once you start to see the shift, you'll get to free up time. So for example, none of my teachers have duties. We don't have hall duties. You know why? Because kids want to be in class. So they're not roaming the halls. We don't have cafeteria duty because our kids don't, fight. And so we don't need all that coverage. So my instructional assistant and one staff member, my Encore team, do lunch duty. So once you start to see the positive changes, it's going to make up so much room for your staff to be able to do the things that you want to do. Like I said, we took an early release day where, instead of having a class every 20 minutes and a bell change, we took that hour and a half and just made a community day once a month. And so instilling that community and relationships, the kids are performing better, more than they would if they had that extra 20 minutes of instruction.
Wow, I love that. We also have
Johanna. It's Rebecca, sorry. I just wanted to make sure there's a question earlier that I just wanted to flag. You might have been about to do that, asking how you involve parents. Do you have parent circles, PTAs, or other groups?
That's what I was doing, yeah.
So for parents, I meet with all parents of incoming students the prior year. So in May, I have an orientation and the teachers are set up and they divide out the information of who we are and what we do. And then I meet with the parents and I go over all the expectations, the bullying forms, the circles. So that's how we start. And then contractually, our teachers have to do 5 after school events. So we focus those on parent workshops. So we did one on anxiety, depression, and self-harm. And then I offered, with the teacher's permission, they got 10 points extra credit for every room they visited. And it was parents understanding my academics, and they would do fun activities with their parent, and it would show parents how we learn and what we do at school. And so those are the things that we did to get the parents on board. And again, when we positively affirm with the parent that the student did the right thing, like, hey, mom, they did come in and fill out a form. You know, we are working on it. Like, parents are so grateful. Then they ask about, you know, being a part of the process, and then we incorporate that into what we do.
Excellent. It's important to have our parents involved in the process as well. The next question that I'm seeing for Principal Patton is, what challenges, if any, have you had with getting district leadership to support and understand the focus and direction of your educational program, or any pushback that you've had? But I know you have that superintendent credential, so that might help.
Yeah. So I am known, I will defend my students and my teachers and my parents to the end. And so if it's something that matters to us as a school, then I fight for it. You know, I fight for it at the detriment of myself, you know, if I have to, because it's just that important. So then once you start to see the changes, you know, how can you not support zero fights? How can you not support we're, you know, in the top 2 performing middle schools in the district? And it's only because, you know, we push and we have those results. So pick those areas that you can use as data to show your district. So you could say, hey, our attendance went up, you know, because more kids are coming to school because they want to be there. Or look at our discipline decreased in this areas. So pick some wins that you can use as a staff and as a leader to take back to your district to allow you to think outside of the box. So give your district some guarantees, and then you got to just work like crazy to meet that challenge. But I think that you will. And then I think that other people will look and see what you're doing, and then, you know, you'll get more leeway with it.
Excellent. So I'm wondering if Nasika, if your question was answered, do you have any advice for parent involvement in and out of school settings, like in an after-school program, with the answering of the other questions about school?
Yeah, I would just tap into organizations. So like we're planning like a single mom night where we're gonna get local hairstylists and we're gonna get pampering and those other things, and just get them to come in. We do a tea, a mother-daughter tea, where we come in, and then while we're drinking tea and eating the cookies and sandwiches, I do questions. Mom, tell me about your 7th grade self, or what was it like when you started your cycle? So we just incorporate it through different creative events to get the parents in. And so use your local organizations, because a lot of those organizations have either the funding to support that, or they have the connections where they'll supply some of the resources that you need for those evenings.
Excellent. Great. So I am seeing that there's kind of a pause with our interactive chat. And so I'm going to go back to some of the questions that were initially posed when folks were registering for this webinar. And there's someone out there that asks, as a school psychologist, how can I support fair and just discipline practices for our students of color? I think you touched on it when you're talking about equity.
Yeah. My school psych, I have her once a week, even though I have, because I'll beg. I'll have, she comes in now another day a week, 1 period a day, and she does a social group with those students that have the most challenges, and she does social skills. She does it through social settings and stories where the students are putting themselves in other shoes, so they learn empathy. So having those groups help a lot, because you're pulling those children out of the main setting and you're working with them on a more intimate basis. And so that's one of the ways that my school psych really supports us. And then before we do any MTSS program, say for example, if we're identifying them as having a disability, we do wellness checks first. So she helps organize the doctor visit to make sure that they're physically well. And then it might be the behavior specialist with our children's hospital to make sure that they're mentally well. So she has those resources, and she's able to provide intervention sites. She sends us links every week that teachers can go to help them with alternatives, because when teachers don't have alternatives, that's when they rely on the consequences. So as a psych, if you can give them strategies and you're filling their toolbox, they will use those tools. And if you come in and say, hey, I'm going to come in and work with you, or do you mind if I do a station in the back with some of the students that aren't listening or being disruptive, and you can work with the other students, you're going to get that support, and they're going to support you in that equity stance.
Thank you. Someone else is also asking, or asked previously, what practices can I follow to develop a training program for organizations in my city who serve primarily girls of color? I think that you gave the Castle resource and the Lovescaping, but are there any other tools to develop training that you would suggest?
I would look at the organizations that are very successful with it. So for example, in Columbus, we have Rise Sister Rise, and a lot of the things that she does for Black girls, I ask her to emulate. And so she'll come over and she'll host the summit for us as she does in the community. And then what I asked her was, can you train my girls? Can you train my parents on some of those same skills? And so if you find an organization that does something really well, ask them, will they train or will they be the experts in that area to help you lead? That's what I do.
Excellent. And I think that that also answers another question that had come in about how might a community partner work with schools and demonstrate these practices and buy-ins. And so that is a direct relationship that you just helped to identify for us in that example. Let's see, there were some gender questions. I'm not sure if this is in your purview to want to answer these, but the popular school of thought is that boys of color face harsher discipline, wondering the parallel with girls of color.
I think they're viewed as same. It's both that adultification, it's that they're not children, and so their behaviors are not seen the same. So I think that statistically, they're both at a higher ratio receiving some of the discipline. And as you're seeing now, that girls of color are being treated just as harshly physically with the slamming of, you know, the student out of the chair or dragged down the hallway or the steps. They are treating young African-American girls in the same manner that they're treating boys. And so that's one of the things that we have to be very aware of, how we are treating, you know, our young ladies, because right now there's not a lot of differentiation, even in the physical response that society is, you know, giving to our young ladies. The thing is, there's more programs out there for boys of color. So you have My Brother's Keeper, you have some of the other programs that are geared towards Black males. You have a lot of mentoring, you have gentlemen clubs in schools, you have a lot of things geared towards Black males that aren't necessarily offered for girls of color.
Thank you. And that is true. We have definitely seen that. And you did also kind of touch on this question: how does this get introduced to a school without seeming like we're prioritizing? They specifically said girls over boys of color. But if you're even talking about a school that has a larger demographic of students from different ethnic cultures, how do you address dealing with the specific needs of girls of color?
I think you go back to the data and you say, this is the population that, you know, is suffering from these challenges. And I think you can do, for example, you can do girl empowerment, but then you can also infuse specifically strategies for girls of color. And so, you know, in the reverse of my school, I do have some white children and Hispanic and Asian, but when I'm talking about the 10 most popular queens in Africa, and I say, are you a queen? My expectation is, whether you're a girl of color or not, you better stand up, because you are a queen. I think so, sowing some of those same messages into them. And also, prior to me being in the School of Girls in Color, ironically, I was at an Appalachian school where I was the first Black person that they had ever even seen in a leadership position. And so one of the things that we did when we wanted to see who was missing school, and it actually was white males, we surveyed everybody, and then we pulled that data aside and pulled the white males out. And then we had a specific activity for them, but we still addressed attendance as a whole. So you can still be equitable, but you still can also do a laser focus to say, this is the demographic that's leading the group. So we could talk about suicide, but then I could talk about parents, 168% increase for girls of color. So that's presenting the information without it being offensive to say that, yes, here's our strategy for everybody. Anybody can use this strategy. But I got to talk to my girls of color who's not necessarily getting this strategy or reaching this healing point. So I'm going to do a little more work for them. And if you have something that you're struggling with, guess what? I'm going to come and I'm going to show you just as much love on what you're struggling with. So that's how you do the equity. You can address it. And when you have an open door policy and they know that they can come to you no matter what, then I think that balances out, and then they'll start advocating. So we had our girls from Africa, they wanted to do something during African American History Month, and then they came to me and said, well, Ms. Patton, we have a few Asian students and we feel like we don't celebrate anything with them, so can they come in and celebrate that month with us and we could do something together? So when you build that culture, they don't see it as separate or isolated or one group getting more. It's like, hey, I'm getting this wonderful thing. Can we bring these in too so that we all share the same experience?
Excellent. So transformative, I'm hearing transformative culture, and I'm also hearing, I also love the language, the transformative language of trying to reach a healing point. That's language that everybody is susceptible to agreeing that folks want to get to their healing point. Thank you. Let's see, what else do we have? Oh, there's, yes.
Can I pipe up with a question of my own?
Absolutely.
So Principal Patton, I couldn't help but notice that during your presentation, you mentioned, you didn't focus on it, but you did say that you choose not to send in resource officers when there's conflict in the classroom. And you coupled that with talking about a sense of safety in the classroom. So I'd love it if you could elaborate on that.
So one of the messages that I say to my girls so much that they'll say it to other people, and people kind of chuckle because it sounds weird to them, because they'll say, we don't fight here. And so they'll look at you and be like, we don't fight here. It's not even an option. And so what I tell my students, like, if I have to come, you know, and I make it light, if I have to chubby myself up these steps to come running to a classroom, like, it's going to be a serious conversation. And, you know, I tell them, like, I stress eat, so I'm eating donuts and cake. And so, like, I can't run as fast. And so, like, if I come, I really just need you to cooperate and come with me. And so they again, that's through my expectations that I'm not going to put my hands on you. I shouldn't have to put my hands on you. You are a woman with a powerful voice. You have been empowered. You have been with me for 3 years. So my expectation is that you will respond in a manner that I would respond in. And so I'll say to them, like, if they're escalated, I'll say, I'll wait, and I'll go to my desk and I'll work and I'll do this and I'll run in and out of my office. And then after about 20 minutes, they'll be like, well, I'm ready to talk now. You know what I mean? So you just have to use those strategies with them and try not to engage them when they're in that moment. And so if they're huffing and puffing, I'm gonna huff and puff right next to you. We're gonna stand there and I'm gonna look and I'm gonna say, you ready to go to the office? And they're gonna say yes, because I let them know I should never have to put my hands on you, ever. You know, I love you too much for that. And so that's just the message that I have. And they know, like I said, if I have to come up there and come up them steps for good reason, like, it's going to be a conversation. So 9 times out of 10, they don't want that conversation. And so they will come to me before they will go to the, you know, our safety and security, who's only there 2 days a week. But they know that when they come, they're going to have a voice and I'm going to listen. Like, you're going to get out everything you need to say. So you might as well just come on and tell me your side of the story, as opposed to, I'm not going to argue with you about a cell phone. If you don't want to give it up, we'll just go call your mom and she can make the decision and they're fine. But I'm not going to snatch it out your hand, because there are other options and alternatives to physically restraining a student unless they're going to harm themselves, you know, or others. But, you know, we just really don't have that, because I preach it every day, is that we don't fight here. We don't use our hands because we're too intelligent.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep.
And I also just want to add that I appreciate that process, because it allows a lot of things to happen when the safety resource officers aren't coming to the classroom. It also limits and reduces the amount of trauma that the other students can experience, and allows the class to remain in a level of normalcy so that they can continue on, while the young person who is having whatever in behavior can be addressed in a different space. So then it's just not allowing students to then have to talk about the incidents and, you know, make a big deal about it. So it's a wonderful practice and process to establish within the schools for that. And it also helps the person facilitating the class in that space to continue to hold the other students, so that all of the focus is not misdirected to one place.
And you have to show them you have to show the SROs in a different light as well. So when the police come into my building, we did an assembly with them, and we made them a little plaque, and we talked about thanking them for, you know, sometimes we'll have like girls that are followed and we have to call the police, you know, on a bus, or just sex trafficking or anything like that. And so they come in and they dance and they have fun with our girls and they talk to our girls. So like every time you're seeing a safety resource officer, it's not in a punitive manner. And so they're just a part of our community. This is the resource that we use them for. We use them to stay safe. We don't use them to, you know, intervene in our community with our conflict. And so when they recognize that, they treat them differently as well. They're excited to see them versus being fearful or, you know, putting up a guard with them in that manner.
Which is another strong restorative practice, right? To making sure that we're building relationships with our people in our community, whoever and however they play a part. But it's great to not have to see them or just experience them in a punitive manner. Excellent. So there was a question, and we didn't get to speak on this at all. Are there any specifics, data digging or anything for our trans or gender non-conforming youth as it relates to their presence in the school and having their voices heard? And
right. I think that it is very important to survey those students, and also to survey students that are interacting with them, and find out what is important to them, and making sure that you have those affinity groups that offer support to them as well. So that could be a topic during community day, or that could be what clubs or what are your interests in, so that when a teacher is sponsoring an activity, they can reach out to them as well and to meet some of their needs. So I think it goes back to being inclusive, to make sure that we understand, you know, what their feelings are, who they are, and what their needs are, and are we having anything that represents those needs in our building systematically. So not just, I'm going to come over to you because it's this small group over here, or there's a student over here that may feel that way, but like, how do we incorporate that in our entire being of our school and our community, so that we all have that understanding and appreciation for everybody, and just being who you are. You know what I mean? I think that's the most important thing, is to, you know, celebrate you for who you are. So when we do the natural hair day, or my teacher just loved when I said no makeup day, and I wouldn't let anybody wear makeup. None of us could wear makeup. And we just stripped ourselves down. And it was eye-opening for the teachers, because they were like, well, I didn't know if I should wear jeans and dress down because I didn't have makeup on. I don't know if I should have dressed up even more because I was so plain. Like, they were walking with their heads hung low. They didn't want to make eye contact. And so again, when you push people to that emotional side, they get it. And then they can transfer that over to students and in the shoes of students. And so we were all, I think, much appreciative of when a student strips themselves down and have raw emotion and show you who they are without the mask. You know what I mean? Then they can appreciate that, and we can move forward. So those are the type of things that we do in the building to address all those issues. And then it allows that one student who may be different to be themselves, because everybody's being themselves, and everybody's unique, and everybody's different. And so you have to create those opportunities for those children to shine, even if they don't come to you and express that they need that.
I'm a huge advocate for experiential learning, because that brings everybody onto the same plane. For sure. Excellent. So I am seeing that there is a person named Crystal that a question, and I think that your mic is being opened.
Yes.
So I know earlier you mentioned about having the parents participate and that giving extra credit. And so I was thinking about the children whose parents are not involved. Unfortunately, you know, there's some kids whose parents are not around. So how do you combat that versus those who have the extra credit points versus those whose parents are not involved?
And that's the voice of our brand new communications associate at the Center on Poverty and Inequality. So I just wanted to extend a welcome to Crystal, who just joined us yesterday. It's her second day on the job.
Yeah, thank you.
So I think we do. So again, can you bring a person of support to attend that activity, or do you want to come with a friend? You have the opportunities to get those points, or we offer a lot of different activities. So I know a lot of people do ask that, like we have a father-daughter dance. So it is, well, what do you do about the children who don't have fathers? I think we have to be careful not to celebrate those students who do for the lack of those who don't, but I think that you also offer alternatives. So we went and we got some Navy SEALs. We got a couple of military recruits, and they dressed in their uniform. They came to the school, and when the student pulled up, they met them at the door, and they escorted them into the dance, and they had fun. So again, you have to fill in those gaps for children, because that's part of the healing process, to say, you know, I didn't grow up, you know, with my father. It wasn't until we were later on in life we reconnected, but I had that support system around me that I didn't realize that it was that much of a deficit, because I had another village. And so again, if that's a teacher, if it's another support person, I think that you can just show students, you know, look at the dynamic. You know, how does that affect children that don't have parental support? And then that's when you have to start filling in those gaps with those resources and those counters to that trauma. So that would be my suggestion. So my students know, whether they attend or not, there will be plenty of opportunities. Everything is not for everybody, but nobody will be left out.
Great, thank you. And on that note, we're just going to address some questions about scalability and some of the advocacy work that we're engaging in on a national, state level to bring attention to this important issue of focusing on how Black girls and girls of color are doing in school, in the same way that we kind of brought up about Black male achievement initiatives. And so Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley and a number of the folks that were in the Push Out film are working on federal legislation to support Black girls and girls of color, specifically in schools, which I think policy recommendations in that way help to appropriate funding to the appropriate programming and tools to support the success of Black girls and girls of color. So that is some of the national work that is happening. We can look on for updates on National Black Women's Justice Institute website through Georgetown Center on Poverty and Law. Our Trauma Informed Schools Learning Network will put that information up. Girls Inc. also provides a monthly conference call and talks about all of the federal legislation particular to girls. And then we always give updates on Black girls and girls of color when there is opportunity. And if there's anything that's happening on the local level with folks that are online with us today, please share that information resource, and then we can make that available on the Trauma Informed Schools Learning Network site. Do you want to add anything, Rebecca?
One other resource that I would point out to people on the line is the Girls at the Margin National Alliance, which also has monthly calls to update people on what's happening, local initiatives through federal legislation around the country. Feel free to contact us at the Center on Poverty and Inequality if you'd like to join that alliance.
All righty. So this was fantastic. We are super appreciative to all of the fantastic resources that Principal Patton provided us today. You also can go on to the Push Out Film website. They have additional trainings and clips of some of the experts that were on the film for more resource in your schools. And then also, we really are thankful and acknowledging the wealth of information from our membership across the nation. And then we have some folks across the globe. And so if there is any expertise, any best practices and protocols, any wins or successes that you are identifying, that you're participating in, that you're spearheading in your own environment, then please share those resources with us. That is the whole point of us bringing ourselves together, so that we are making sure that we are creating trauma-informed, healing-able spaces in our schools specific to Black girls and girls of color. But we know that we elevate all of our students when we focus and center on this group. So we need to hear from you. We'd love to hear from you, and we love to share those practices with one another. Anything else?
I just wanted to add, we'll be following up with an email with a feedback survey. We'll give you instructions for how to access the recording and also how to request a certificate of attendance, if that's helpful for getting credits for your participation in today's webinar. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good to see all of you, and we'll see you next time.
All right.